Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Daniel Dubois has advanced to 11-0 after stopping Richard Lartey in 4 rounds at the Wembley Arena in London. This was quite an entertaining and fun fight. It got a bit wild at times. They were trading in different spots of different rounds and it sort of devolved into an all-out war just in really isolated patches, but it made it incredibly fun to watch. But Dubois comes out swinging from the get-go, charging forward, landing a long right hand, but then he was backed up with a few shots from Lartey, and it was at this point I thought we might actually have something here, a bit of a fight on our hands. Lartey may not just come to lie down. Lartey managed to get Dubois' attention, and he wasn't nearly as aggressive for the rest of that first round. But Dubois, on the back of his jab, right hands, he still won that round comfortably enough. Round 2, this had a bit of everything. It really was a bit of a strange round. Dubois comes out pumping the jab, but then Lartey's warned for holding. But then Dubois lands a low left hook. The fight stopped momentarily. Then immediately off the back of that stoppage, this is the first of the real good exchanges where Lartey backs up Dubois with the right hand. It was probably the best chin check that I've seen Daniel Dubois have in his career so far. But then almost immediately, he's hurt by a right hand. Lartey is backed up, he covers up, and it was probably good for him that the round came to a conclusion pretty shortly after that. Round 3, there was a vicious right uppercut that landed for Daniel Dubois. And then Lartey's covering up, he's holding, he's warned again by the referee, but immediately off the back of this, just this furious phone booth style trading just breaks out. Great action, just swinging for the fences, both of them. So Dubois was actively taking on this risk. It was all on. Both were landing shots here, and they both held up relatively well. Dubois, he might have got the better of the action, but Lartey was still managing to catch him. And I did get from this fight that Daniel Dubois, his chin is actually not too bad. Lartey was noted for being a decent puncher, and he did manage to catch Dubois a number of times. Yeah, especially there was a couple of times in that furious exchange. So we do know to some extent that Daniel Dubois has got a decent chin. Round 4, this is when the fight ended. There was a right hand that landed, followed up by a left hook, and it seemed to be maybe the weight of all the punishment that Lartey had taken during the fight, because he was effectively unable to defend himself. He might have put his hands up, sort of put the earmuffs on, but the guard was being split at ease by Daniel Dubois with jabs and right hands. But it was this right hand, it rocks him, dropped by a left hook. He gets up. He's a bit dazed, but the referee looks at his condition and waves it off. Immediately after that, Lartey didn't seem to, be too fussed by it, wasn't complaining. But then later in the corner, a few minutes later, he was protesting, saying that the fight was ended too soon. But it did look like when it was ended that he didn't look too fussed about that, but maybe that was because he was dazed. I didn't think it was a bad stoppage, but he did beat the count. He was up and, seemingly somewhat lucid, but it was waved off. So Daniel Dubois gets the stoppage, advances to 11-0 in what was a very fun fight. And this was the test that he needed. Someone who could actually trade with him, could punch him on the chin and actually put his chin to the test, because as he steps up in competition now, because he was always expected to beat Richard Lartey and beat him handily, but as he steps up in competition, he is going to get hit. And some of the punches in the upper echelon of the division punch significantly harder than Richard Lartey, or they will be able to time Daniel Dubois, find openings and land on his chin or to the body. So he needs to actually have some of these tests in his earlier part of his prospect phase. And he is starting to come to the end of that. He's 11 fights in now. I would expect maybe some competition similar to Richard Lartey, probably for the rest of 2018 or similar. It does sound like Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois will fight at some point. Whether that's next, it's unclear. The British Boxing Board of Control has announced on their website that Dubois and Joyce have actually agreed to terms to fight. But whether that's next is the thing, because Joyce is actually going to be fighting in May. That is going to be on the Billy Joe Saunders undercard. So who knows when they will fight. There's also the talk of a Nathan Gorman fight for Dubois or Joyce. But those three look like they will be fighting at some point, either in 2019 or 2020. But overall, this was another good development fight for Daniel Dubois. there were some things that were coming his way that he hasn't had in other fights. Some of the guys that he's been fighting have really been quite soft opponents. More recently, he's had a more durable opponent in Kevin Johnson. He's had a bigger opponent in Razvan Kajanu, so he's been getting, some different things from these different fights. But to see his chin checked like that, and it was, clipped a couple of times, he held up well. So he does have a chin to some extent, and I guess you could argue a Joyce and Dubois fight, that may come down to whose chin is better, who lands the hardest punches earliest. Hard to say. That could be a very fun fight, could be a bit of a phone booth style fight, as was this one for different spots in it. But Richard Lartey, I've got to give a bit of credit to him. I was a bit skeptical that he was going to turn up, and I said I would only believe the fight was happening once the opening bell rung, and he did turn up, and he did come to fight, and he was game. He was game, and we got a first proper look, or for most people it was the first proper look at who Richard Lartey is. And yeah, maybe he's a top 50 sort of guy in the division. He does have that ranking at 15 in the WBO, but the sanctioning body rankings don't often reflect the actual state of where people are really at in the division. But I think Richard Lartey, if he is prepared to base himself in the UK, he could get some fights. He definitely could, or the United States. I think he definitely has some talent there. There is some fights he could be in and do well and make a bit of money here. So we'll have to see what happens with Richard Lartey, but full credit for him for one, turning up, but two, coming to fight. And he was able to put Daniel Dubois under some pressure at times with the weight of his punches, testing him out on that chin, and it was good to see. This is the sort of fight that Dubois needed. I would note, though, that they alleged that Richard Lartey was just 27 years old. He looked every one of his 27 years old. I actually thought he must have been closer to 35. As someone noted on Twitter, he must have got his birth certificate in Cuba. And perhaps, potentially, that's why there was this hold-up with the visa issues. Maybe even the commentary team was joking about it and sort of noting the age issue. So I don't know if anyone really believes that he's 27 years old, because he certainly looks all of those years. But he does have a decent chin. He just, got outworked and worn down in this fight. He was unable to defend himself. He looked a bit raw at times, and he's definitely got something there, but he's not a finished product. He's not as polished as he possibly could be, but he's got a decent chin and a good right hand, and he showed moments of that in the fight. So full credit for Richard Lartey. But this was another good fight for Daniel Dubois on his development journey. And he will be fighting some guys within the sort of top 30 soon enough. But, he did take some risks in this fight. He was willing to trade with Richard Lartey to, back his chin and to be able to knock Lartey out. And ultimately, he was able to do that. Even in the finishing sequence of that fight, he was taking some risks there, perhaps unnecessary risks. And maybe his trainer will be a little bit concerned by that. But it delivered on the entertainment front, I can tell you that. But what do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.